Lon Haldeman. He's one of my heroes. You know, I'm lucky in this business. I got into this business and I ended up with all these heroes. Here's one of them. As you know, he's cycled across the U.S. many times and holds records. He's the star. I just want you to know that I admire him, respect him, and we're just so delighted to have him whenever he has the time to come and share his story with us. We're just so very delighted, and I'll let him tell you about all of his escapades. And thank you, Lon.
Thank you. Well, we got a good turnout tonight. I'm going to kind of go over 50 years of history, and the questions I usually get, two questions. Why did you want to ride across the country, race across the country, and then why did you want to write a book? And for cross-country riding, it's been going on since Thomas Stevens in 1884 rode a high-wheeler across the country in a little over 100 days. And he basically had to walk and push his bike about a third of the way. And that's back when there was an Oregon trails, they had put the railroad in, he rode along the side of the railroad tracks. You know, they had the Pony Express remnants of that route. So he was pushing this high-wheeler bike a lot. Well, he came back, he ended up going around the world. Took him a couple of years, but he wrote a book, inspired another guy named George Nellis in 1887, and George was from New York State, and so he decided he's going to go faster. He wanted to break the record. So that's kind of the start of the cross-country record phase. So George Nellis went from New York State, went to San Francisco in around 75 days, and was a little more focused. Thomas Stevens could have gone faster, but he took a week off here and there just to go sightseeing and things. So George Nellis comes back, he writes a book about it, and George was on a high wheel bike. Well, then they developed the safety bike, you know, wheels the same size, because you didn't do headers, because it was still a fixed gear, you know, it was still hard to ride. But anyway, so George writes a book, somebody reads that, they go across the country on a safety bike and do it in 60 days in 1900. And little by little, that record got chipped away at over the next 50 years. Now, we might have to get going with this. We're gonna, the computer keeps wanting to go to sleep, so let's try to keep moving here. So I'm going to just keep this running. So that's what inspired me. And in 1943, a guy named 1943, the record went down to 17 days or 27 days, and in 1960s went down to 18 days, and eventually was cut several days down to eventually 14 days, 13 days, and so on. So I was always inspired by that. And then I eventually did the cross-country double transcontinental record, and that was such kind of a weird event, went on to do many more cross-country rides. And to write a book, my mom and dad kept saying, you should write this stuff down, you know, keep track of that. And so it took about 10 years before I finally compiled the book, and a lot of the stories in the book came from things that I had written in cycling magazines and things over the years. So I had pretty good documentation of a lot of those events, and then there were lots of newspaper clippings that are also in the book that we could use as reference material. So that's kind of how I got involved in racing across the country. But my history, ride to Sharon, ride to Capron, going off all those different places, and you know, riding 3 miles was considered a long way to go back then. And so eventually I started riding 30 miles a day, which at that time was considered a long way to go. And then eventually 40 miles. So anyway, eventually I started riding a little bit further. I got a job in a bike shop in Fontana, rode back and forth to work. I had a chance to be a job as a draftsman in at a place in Harvard, and I went in there for a job interview. And I'm starting to ride more, longer rides, 50 miles, 60 miles, double century on the weekend, putting in 400 or 500 miles a week. And I'm doing the interview, and I'm telling the guy, well, I gotta do this, I gotta ride, and basically there wasn't enough time to go to work. And so I didn't get the job. But the guy said, well, okay. But it turned out a few years later when I started doing cross-country races, he was actually one of my sponsors. So it all worked out well. And this was a bike club we had called the Tired Cranks. And we would come and ride around Lake Geneva, which was, at that time was like a big deal. Well, when I graduated from high school, I wanted to start, going to McHenry County College, which then made a 60-mile round trip every day. And I told my parents, I said, I want to get a really good bike, a Schwinn Voyager for $345. And they said, oh, that's a lot of money for a bike. And I said, no, I'll save on gas and stuff. So anyway, so I started doing that, 60 miles a day plus a double century on the weekends. And gradually, at that time, in the back of my mind, I wanted to try a cross-country record. 1978 is when John Marino first raced across the country, and I was really enthralled with what he was doing. And this is showing up at a race, and you notice my rack. I still had a rack on my bike, and I'd show up to these races. I'd ride over to Rockford or something and do a criterium race with them with my touring bike. But John Marino crossed the country in a little over 13 days and set a new cross-country record in 1978. And so I was like, oh, I really want to do that. Well, he bettered that time to 12 days, 3 hours in 1980. And so now I was riding, again, longer and longer rides. So I did a ride from the northernmost tip of Wisconsin up in Red Cliff down to Bigfoot on the Illinois state line on a one-speed bike and 14 gear, and that was in 1979, and that was really one of my first long overnight rides, and it was life-changing again for me because I was like, oh, this is really neat. I really love doing that. So I thought I want to keep doing more and more long type of rides. So I kept training, and at that time, you don't really know what you don't know, and I knew I had to get better with the logistics. So went down to southern Illinois. I rode 300 miles down, 310 miles down to southern Illinois, did a 300-mile race the next day, and then rode back the following day. So it was 920 miles in 3 days. And there again, that was a good simulation of what it would be to try to ride across the country. My mom and dad were noticed the helmets, those Protec helmets at the time, which were burning hot, But they were very supportive of my cycling during those years, and they actually, this is them on a bike tour that they did around the perimeter of Wisconsin. They went from Illinois over to Iowa, up into Minnesota, then back across northern Wisconsin, into upper the UP of Michigan, and then on down back. So they did about a 1,000-mile loop. But during that time, I wanted to do the transcontinental record, and at that time it was 12 days, 3 hours. So I'm really focused on doing that. Well, during January of 1981, I'm riding rollers in the basement and talking to my dad. And I said, it's been so much work to do the logistics to try to get this transcontinental together. Why don't we go for the double transcontinental record at the same time, which was 36 days. And so in a period of 5 minutes, we said, okay, we're not doing the transcontinental, just that. We're going to go for the double transcontinental, try to go from New York to Los Angeles. At that time, there really wasn't an east to west record. And then turn around and go back to New York and try to break Marino's 12-day 3-hour record. So that was how the double transcontinental all came into being. So at that time, the record was 36 days, but we thought, oh, let's try to do it in 28. So that was going to be our our theme, and this is a poster that we made going ahead of time. And this is a route basically from New York City down across into Arizona and then down towards Los Angeles. Now, we decided to leave New York City at 3 in the morning on a Saturday night, Sunday morning, because the traffic was going to be the least at that time. And you notice the headlight that I had, that was a camping flashlight, which at the time, that's the kind of lights that were available. If anybody ever remember the Wonder Light, the little square battery Wonder Light that put a yellow beam about 15 feet ahead of you, you know, otherwise there was really no good bike lights. Not like today with all the LED and lithium battery kind of stuff. But anyway, so we left. Riding through Spanish Harlem. I knew there was a song about a rose in Spanish Harlem. That's all I knew. And I hit a manhole cover, the lens pops off, the support car crunches the batteries, and I don't have a flashlight. Well, then I have to get on the Verrazano Bridge, which is like the Golden Gate Bridge. It's really big, like a mile, and I have to walk on the sidewalk because you can't ride on the roadway because of these huge expansion joints that are like 6 feet across and 4 feet wide. You know, motorcycles have trouble getting across them. So anyway, that's how the double transcontinental started, was basically a half an hour walk across the dark bridge in the middle of the night. And I tell some people from New York about that, and they said there's no way they would ever be out on Verrazano Bridge at night. You know, it's just not a real safe thing to be doing. But nobody bothered me. But I just remember that night walking along and seeing all the oil refineries lit up in the distance of New Jersey, and how, you know, beautiful that all was. You know, of course in the daytime it's not nearly as impressive. But now Susan's my crew. Susan I had met during an event called the Bicycle Cross Missouri in 1980, and she was a woman rider. She did the ride, and she was the last person to finish. There was like 35 starters, about 16 finishers. She was the last person to finish the 540 miles. I had finished first in around 33 hours. She was the last person to finish. They sent us a listing of all the people that were in it with their names and address. I wrote her a letter. I said, oh, that's pretty neat that a woman wants to, you know, do long distance cycling. Well, she basically went over to her boyfriend's house and said, oh, I got this letter, look at what this guy's going to do this cross-country record. And her boyfriend said, oh, yeah, you should crew. So anyway, then she contacts me, and we write letters back and forth, and she finally breaks up with her boyfriend, and she says, okay, she's going to come on the cross-country ride with me. She was a nurse and an accountant, and so she goes over to her parents' house and says, oh, I'm going to help this Lon Haldeman guy. He's a PhD student from Harvard. But she didn't tell him I went to Harvard High School, and I wasn't a very good student, so the PH was mainly silent. And so anyway, so she gets permission to go on the ride with us. So as we're crossing the country, we're winging everything. You know, we didn't know really what we were doing. You know, we thought, oh, we'll just ride till sundown, go to bed at 8, 9 o'clock, get up at sunrise at 6, have a plate of French toast, and then try to get into double century during daylight hours. So that's how we started off across the country, across West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, and eventually heading down into Missouri. And about this time, you know, the reality is starting to set in of what I'm getting myself into, because the headwinds are blowing, and as you know, I'm eating Archway cookies and bananas. That's what we ate back then. And occasionally I'd go into the motel or into the motorhome, sit down, have a big plate of food, and get back on and ride. And the wind starts blowing, and as I headed off into the panhandle of Texas and towards Oklahoma, the wind is just whipping. And I'm actually riding with a guy, John Royer from Elgin, and you can't see it in this picture, but he has a baseball hat on. And and the trucks would come at us, and there's kind of a crosswind, head crosswind, and the gust of wind would hit us. His hat would blow off, it'd go in the ditch, he'd have to turn around and go find his hat, and I would try to pick up the pace a little bit. You know, I'm only going like 10 miles an hour into this wind. And you can see the grain elevators in the distance. All those towns are set up about 11 miles apart, and that was about an hour's ride. I would see if I could get to the next town in less than an hour. So during that one section, 180 miles in 24 hours. So I wasn't going all that fast, even though I was trying to ride into the night and riding after midnight, hoping the wind would die down, and it really didn't. But one of the things I remember as I'm coming through Kansas, through Pratt, Kansas, they have a big sign outside of town, home of the Miss Kansas pageant, which is a tradition every year, Miss Kansas thing that they always do. And about 60 miles later, you're in Oklahoma, and you go through Hooker, Oklahoma, and I thought, oh, I wonder what an honor would be to be named Miss Hooker. But I eventually worked my way down across New Mexico and across the Continental Divide, and I think I'm going to see the ocean. When you get to the Continental Divide, downhill all the way to the ocean. Well, at the top of every hill, I'm looking for the ocean. I have no idea that Arizona is like 300 miles wide, and it's in the middle there, and there's a lot of hills in Arizona going through Oak Creek Canyon and things. So making okay time, finally get down into the desert, and we kind of know I'm not going to break Marino's 12-day, 3-hour record, but I figured no, we're okay. As long as we can do it in less than 14 days, we'll be in good shape to come back and try to fill the record on the return trip. But I continued into California, and I noticed my brother taking a picture. He's the driver there. Probably we're getting right at the border of California, and he's trying to get me in the picture with the California sign. But as you go across Interstate 10, now, if you've ever driven that section, you come across the desert center, down Palm Springs. Well, when I'm doing this at night, and I come over the hill, Sirocco Summit, I see all the lights down below. I think, oh, Los Angeles, it's all downhill, we're coming into Los Angeles. Well, that was Palm Springs, and I still had 150 miles to go. So I had to get up the next morning, wind is blowing like crazy, headwinds, got to go over another mountain range, and then that last 150 miles took me over about 15 hours, about 10 miles an hour, and there's 360 traffic lights on that section, and that's old Route 66 going across town, which I didn't know anything about Route 66 at the time, but it turned out 20 years later we'd be doing bike tours on Route 66 all the time. So I eventually get down to the finish there, and we did it in 12 days, 18 hours, got down to Santa Monica, and there really was no celebration because we knew we had to get to bed and get back on the bike and get going home, or get going back out of Los Angeles before traffic picked up, because it was so busy going in. That's why I only averaged 10 miles an hour going all the way across Los Angeles with all those traffic lights. So we get into there, and the guy on the left is Victor Vincenti. He's the double transcontinental record holder in 36 days. And he lived like north of Los Angeles or somewhere, but he came in to meet me, and it was really, I thought, really good sportsmanship. He came in to congratulate me on making it across. So we basically slept for 4 hours, got back up 2 in the morning, and started heading back across Los Angeles, got out of town, heading back out into Palm Springs. Now there's still like orange groves. This is all condominiums now. There is no, this looks like a back road. That's an interstate now, going back out of town there. But that's the way it was back in 1981. But the good thing was, every mile we went further east, I was that much closer to finishing in New York. So that was motivation, and the wind was a little bit better. I wasn't getting the whip and tailwinds that I had hoped for, but we were at least making some better progress. and I was riding further into the night, now riding, closer to midnight, and then trying to sleep until 5 in the morning, and then getting up. So now I'm averaging, getting in some 260, 270, 290 mile days. But I was starting to take wear and tear on me, my feet problems, the pounding, the lack of circulation gives you hot foot, which was a problem. Anything that touched the bike hurt, saddle sores, hands, anything. So now we're counting it down. I'm hoping, halfway through, and halfway through on the way back. So I'm at 75% the way through, and I'm hoping I can make it into New York. So as we cross Indiana into Ohio, we're heading into West Virginia, and this is probably the closest I had to a real meltdown, because we're into the second to the last night. I've got about 500 miles to go, and I'm on these hills in West Virginia. I'm just thinking, oh man, we've been trying for this for 10 years, all this planning, all this stuff, and I think it's finally going to happen. So I pretty much had an emotional meltdown. I still stayed on the bike, but I was like, yeah, we're going to do it. And that was a rationalization I finally came through. So we made it through the next day, go through Gettysburg, head towards eastern Pennsylvania, 100 miles to go, and we're at midnight, and we knew we had to get there at 6 in the morning. I said, 100 miles, 6 hours to go, 16.6 miles an hour. I can do it. So I'm riding along. At 3 in the morning, the other support crew drives ahead and talks to the Holland Tunnel. We're going to get permission to go through the Holland Tunnel, which will cut off about 15 miles off the route. Well, they get up there and they say, well, you got to be here by 5 o'clock. So now I'm like 50 miles away, and they say you got 2 hours to get there. So now it's like, put the hammer down. And I was riding with John Schubert from Bicycling Magazine, who's one of the editors, and he said, well, he didn't know if he could keep up or not. So anyway, he got in my slipstream, and we're riding along, and I probably was averaging more like 24 miles an hour, because as I was supposed to get there by 5 o'clock, I get there like 5 minutes after, and they let me go through. So as I'm getting there, there's actually it says Holland Tunnel here. So they have to clear the fumes out, so there's kind of like 10 minutes I had to wait, and they said, okay, you got this far, we're going to let you go through. We're not going to make you go all the way down around the Washington Bridge and back to City Hall, which would add about 15 miles. So as we're waiting to finally get into the Holland Tunnel, the sun is starting to come up, and rolled into the Santa Monica, or the New York City Hall, and we finished in 10 days, 23 hours. So we broke the one-way record by like 28 hours or so. So the east to west time, 12 days, 18 hours, west to east time, 10 days, 23 hours. Combined time with rest stop, or with the stay over in Santa Monica, was 24 days, 2 hours, which is about 12 days faster than the double transcontinental record. So as we're at City Hall, first thing happens, a security guard comes along and goes, you can't be here, you got to move. So there really wasn't a lot of fanfare. There was there was a TV station that came out. I was pretty wiped out, a little bit dazed at the time. Now I had pretty much stayed up for the previous 36 hours. I had some French toast there, because I hadn't eaten all that previous night for about 100 miles. While we're hammering down trying to get there, I really hadn't eaten much at all. It was a nice cool evening, so I didn't drink much either. But eventually, we had to pack up. We had to go back to Staten Island. Now it's 8 o'clock in the morning, and we went to Susan's aunt's house in Staten Island. I went to bed at 9 in the morning, and we had a press conference at noon. So 3 hours later, they wake me up and they say, you got to come down and do this press conference, which the technology, that was kind of the difference between being out of shape and being in shape. So we finished in 7 days, 14 hours. which was the first time anybody was below 8 days. And it wasn't until Michael Seacrest did a single record, he did 7 days, 23 hours in 1990. So, but this record still stands as the fastest human-powered time across the country, riding continually. So, by this time, Susan and I, we had a daughter in the summer of '87, and we had to get our lives together, basically. So we got a house, we settled down, and we started a bicycle touring business. So we didn't really race that much anymore, but we started doing tours across the country, Seattle to Boston, San Diego to Savannah, Mexico to Canada, Florida to Maine, Route 66 and things. So that's what we were doing. So we were on the road at least 100 days a year doing tours. And by this time, you know, we had already raced, between Susan and I, we had raced across the country probably well over 20 times, and race directors for the Race Across America another 10 times. And so we had quite a bit of cross-country experience, so it was a pretty easy transition to start doing tours. And then so we started doing, you know, they were fun tours. You know, we do Route 66, we do the Oregon Trail, we did a lot of theme type of tours. And so and after 40 years, we had done 100 trips across the country. Well, in 1999, my dad wanted to go down to Peru and do a trip on the Amazon, and I had no idea where Peru was, where the Amazon was. I had no idea, but it was a trip with the Field Museum, Chicago. So I went there with my brother, and we were going to go on this boat trip down the Amazon. Everything was really first class. I talked to everybody was also over 70 years old except me and my brother. You know, we were 40. So we talked to the crew a lot. The crew said, yeah, there's a way, we're looking at these maps, there's a way you can ride, you know, you're looking at these these routes, but they don't really tell you that that's not a paved road. You know, there's a line on the map, but that's, you know, that's as far as you can go. And so I'm going to try to go from here to here. And I wanted to go across Peru, but they said, oh yeah, but you know, the road gets really, really bad in there. And I said, okay, I'm going to come back the next year and with my touring bike and my pannier bags, and I'm going to see if I can ride across Peru. So that's what I did. When you leave Lima, eventually this part, by the time you go to the observation tower, at 16,000 feet, and it's 75-mile climb. It takes about 2 days just to do that climb out of Lima. There's a little roadhouse in between. I could stay, you know, it's like 10,000 feet, and it's freezing cold. They give you all these horse blankets to sleep in. But I cross over the pass, and there's about 7 more big ridges you got to go over, and going further and further into the jungle. And the Lonely Planet says, do not go here. This is not a place for tourists. A lot of cocaine traffickers, a lot of drug stuff going on. They said stay away, but I said, well, you know, I'm on a bike. Nobody's going to bother me. Well, I continued to go further and further into the jungle, and a lot of this was like pick up my bike and carry it and push, and you know, walking in cookie dough and how it balls up on your feet. So to go 60 miles took like all day. I'm like averaging 5 miles an hour. And getting to another town, getting to another roadhouse. And the good thing is these trucks would get stuck and I could go around them, and then no truck could catch me for like 3 hours. And I would just be on this desolate jungle road. And so I get to this village, and this guy there in Spanish, he goes, I've never seen a bicycle on this road. You are the first person ever to ride a bicycle, you know, across Peru on this route. You're really crazy, you know. And but it was good adventure. Eventually, I get down to the headwaters of the Amazon. It's not a first-class boat. It's a junky barge kind of a boat. But I go down the Amazon another 400 miles. I ended up in Iquitos, where our tour the previous year with the Field Museum started. and I meet some guys from the boat that I had known the year before, and they took me around to some of these shantytown kind of places. I saw a lot of jobs that could be done. They need stairs built, they need beds made. So I would go every day, I'd spend 20 bucks, buy a load of lumber, and I would go into these houses and do projects. So that's kind of how I got to know a lot of people. And they said, oh, that's really nice that you can build a bed, but we need a school. And they said, well, how much is it going to cost? I said, oh, $14,000. Well, so I go back home, and I go back the next year, we raise the money, we go back, we start building the school, and it starts off, they have 200 kids. Well, it's on the outskirts of town. Iquitos is 400,000 people. A lot of people, refugees, are moving in because of the drug, the fighting in the hills, and everybody's getting into going to the city for safety. Well, so the school now starts getting 100 more kids every year. The city, we were 9 kilometers outside of town. All of a sudden, the city is built up around the school. Over a period of several years, it's up to 600-700 kids, and so it's going on pretty good. And they keep expanding. We keep putting in more and more additions of rooms. It goes from 7 rooms to 14 rooms to 20 rooms, and they're up to 700, 800 kids. Well, about this time, there's another village about 40 miles out in the jungle, and they wondered if we could build a school there. And this is way out in the middle. Now this is after we kept building that school 9 kilometers out of town, it got to 1,000 kids. They tore it down, and then the government actually came back and built this one, which has got about 30 rooms now. So this is the one that's there now. We didn't pay for this one, but that's probably a $200,000 school. But the government came and built that, and that's what's there now. And we're still supporting that. We go actually right now we're actually putting a new roof on that school, which is about a $5,000 project. So we brought in all this tin and roofing material and stuff. They're actually working on that right now. But we still support that school quite a bit. And we help them with, like, this is a water filter system we added. But anyway, the school that's out in 40 miles out of town, that's really in the jungle. There's no really way to get there. You have to like walk, and off the main highway, you still have to carry, if you ever carried a bag of cement on your back, that's really hard to carry 3 miles. So we had to carry all the rocks, all the sand, all the stuff back in there. And this is what they had been using as a school, and it was pretty basic. But we tore that down and started milling more wood. We had to cut all this wood to eventually start building a new school. So I had to bring all that out of the jungle, start building another school. Now this is going to be smaller. It's only going to have really 4 rooms for about 60 kids. But it was kind of a big project because all that stuff had to be carried in by hand, all the bricks and everything. Eventually that school gets built, and it's still in the middle of nowhere. It's really hard to get to. I don't think it ever will get much over 60 kids because everybody just kind of like appears out of the jungle. Kids have to walk several kilometers to get there every day. But I kept going back to Peru every year, and I've been going there ever since 1999, getting to know a lot of people, a lot of regions. We do a different bike tour. We start in the south and ride over the mountains, and start in the jungle and ride back to Machu Picchu, and we went crisscrossed all over Peru. But we also started doing these easier projects. So this a village that needed a road grader built. So this was an afternoon daily project that we did, and we built this road grader so they could pull it and smooth out their sand road. So that was, it wasn't an easy project, but that was a simple thing that we could do. And then as we started going back into these jungle places, the kids with the orphanages and stuff, we said, well, why were we going here? We have a support car, let's bring them a load of clothes. We'd bring clothes, we'd bring bags of rice, we'd bring as much stuff as we could in our support vehicles, and we go back to these orphanages and deliver a lot of supplies to them. And those, again, were places that you really weren't recommended to go. The nuns would actually come out and meet us and go with us the last 100 miles so the trucks didn't get hijacked and everything stolen, because they weren't going to attack the nuns. But that's how we moved a lot of that stuff into the jungle when we had to do it overland. And then in Iquitos, that town of 400,000, a lot of kids were living on the street back then. So we'd all get them together and we'd give them a special invitation to a secret restaurant. And he said, show up here at 7 o'clock, we're gonna have a big dinner. And we'd always have a big birthday party. So we'd buy all kinds of clothes and things for the kids and put on a big dinner for them. And they were always so polite. And the kids, they wouldn't finish their food. They would get a plastic bag, they'd eat some, put it in a plastic bag and take it, because they didn't know when they were gonna get their next meal. So they learned to ration their food, and so they go home with a new set of clothes and a bag of food, and it was always that birthday party. And now we've been doing that now it's been almost 20 years, and a lot of those kids are grown up. And I still see some of them driving moto taxis and on the street. Now they got families of their own. They still come up and remember going to those birthday parties and how good that was, that somebody took care of them and gave them a decent meal. Well, I continued to do more group tours down the Amazon, and we would ride our bikes to the boat docks, we'd get on the boats, we'd sleep on the boats, and we started bringing these books and things with us going down, and we'd stop at these villages, during daylight hours, during school hours, and in the villages, the teachers would say, why did you come here? Nobody's ever stopped here before. Nobody ever, no gringos ever stopped there before. It was like the first white people ever to stop there. But anyway, we would give them a bushel basket full of books, notepads, pens, pencils, all that kind of stuff. And so we got to go to a lot of places there in the backcountry that most people would never see. And it was always good adventure, again, going down. And as I would hang out in Iquitos, one morning I was there and they were having a bike race, so I got to talk to some of them. And two of the girls I met, on the left, Alessandra, and her little sister, Samantha, they spoke good English. We got to talk a little bit and told me about the cycling scene, what was going on in Iquitos, in the middle of nowhere. And they actually had a pretty active group. They didn't have any good equipment. And I said, well, next year we're going to come back and I'll deliver a bunch of stuff. So we started collecting things, and we go down there with a tour. We may take 6 or 10 of our riders, bring a bike that we'd ride on our tour, bring a gear bag of clothes, and then we'd have these bike races, and then we'd give all the prizes out to the riders. And a lot of the bikes that we rode across Peru, then we'd give out and leave down there for the bike racers. Well, some of the racers that we knew back in the day eventually ended up on the Pan American team. And Stephanie is on the left, Alessandra on the right, and they've come to the United States and have raced a lot over in Kenosha. They stay with us, and they've been on the Pan American team. And so we're in contact with the Pan American team almost every day. Somebody from the national cycling team contacts me and lets me know what they're up to. And I was down there last November, and I'll go back there again and we'll do a bunch of races and stuff with them. But it's been really interesting. Now, Alessandra ended up getting a job on an Italian cruise boat, and she's leaving next week to go to Italy to work as a cruise boat, like as a fitness instructor on a Caribbean, not Caribbean, but a Mediterranean cruise boat. And then Stephanie is, right now, she went to Utah and she's working at a ski resort. And she has a standing offer at the Abbey over in Fontana. If she can ever get her green card, they offered her a management position at the Abbey. But because of immigration and a bunch of that messing around right now, it's hard for them to get their green cards. Well, I continued to stay involved with Craig Kelfie. If you ever heard of Kelfie Carbon Bicycles, he was doing a trip to Ghana and he was making bamboo bikes. So that's, I went there with a tour with him for about 10 other people, and he made these bamboo bikes using the same technology he uses when he makes a carbon bike of epoxy lugs, and the lugs are dipped in this yarn. It's carbon, and it's not carbon fiber, it's like a flax fiber dipped in epoxy, wrapped around the lugs with an aluminum insert, and then he makes these bamboo bikes. So we went with him and we started doing these tours around to these different villages all around in Ghana. And so one of the things was that we'd go to these villages and they would have a race around the soccer field. They'd have like three laps around the dirt soccer field. And I said, okay, the winners can go on our tour. So the next year we took 3 of the riders with us that had won the race, and they got to go join us and go on a tour around Ghana. It's about a 400-mile loop, but these are 3 of the winners that went with us. And so for them it was a big deal because they're from the bush. They're from, they live in a grass hut. So to go to a hotel, eat at a restaurant, and everything was really a big deal for them. And we've stayed in contact with them over the years, and so we've expanded our friends and things that we know. But they're really good riders. If you're a good mountain biker, you should try this. Riding with a box on your head, but they're very good, strong riders. But some of the girls that we've met, we've helped establish. This one girl, we set her up with a hairdressing studio, and another one, sewing centers. And that's something that we've started to do more and more, is traveling around to these high schools, and we bring in 10 or 15 sewing machines, and then the home ec department would teach them the sewing, and then they would use the sewing machines and make school uniforms for the grade school, and then they, $7 worth of material, they could make a school uniform for the kids. So we've done that quite a few different high schools around. And as we go to these high schools, we'd see things that they needed done. And this place had this cafeteria where they eat, and they were jammed in there pretty tight, so we needed to expand that. So we took it and built, increased it almost double the size, and built a brand new cafeteria and a kitchen for one of the high schools. And then some of the students that continued on into the university, we've helped them continue with education, going to taking university classes. Well, as one of the stories that happened in Peru, as we again went down there every year, we were there with a group, and we're on a boat like this, and it gets hijacked by some people in this village, and they were mad at the boats for polluting the river. And they didn't have a problem with us personally, but with the boat company. So they take the boat, they take the crew and lock them up in the jail. We're basically stranded now 200 miles from anywhere of the nearest city. And when we're sitting there, we got to talk to the village, like, why are you upset? And he said, because we don't have a water source, the tributaries are polluted by the oil companies, and we need a better water source. So we said, okay, we'll dig you a well. So as we're sitting there for a couple days, we got to know the situation. Eventually the Navy sent this other smaller boat, so we were crammed in the original boat. Now we're super crammed into the boat half the size, but we do get the final 200 miles done. We go back to back to Iquitos, and so for the next year we work on the logistics about trying to dig a well in the jungle. So we go back the next year with pumps and drilling equipment and everything, and we drill a water well in this village. And this is the boat that we took next. We didn't take the big boat, we took this smaller motorboat, and that's the town of Kunaniko that we dug the well, and they eventually put a house over the top of this, and this is the filter system and things. And so while we're there, they finally got a water source, and it actually worked pretty well, as they had to sample it and things. And so, but that happened just by accident. Had we not been held hostage, we would have not even known what the deal was. But that's one of the things that, again, just happened by being meeting somebody by accident. And so when I'm in Peru, I'm always going on a taxi tour. If it's not a bike tour, it's a taxi tour. Hire a driver, drive a couple 100 miles a day, go on all these little back roads all across the country. And I'm in the mountain town of Ayacucho one night, and I see this woman and her kids begging for food on the side of the sidewalk, and I could tell that, you know, that just didn't look right. So I offered I got him some crackers, I gave him some stuff, and I talked to him some more, found out, said, do you want to go to dinner? You know, you haven't had a good meal. So through an interpreter, I was able to kind of piece together the story. But they're on the run from Venezuela, and she managed a cell phone call center, very well educated, but she's still on the run. So she had to go to Peru as opposed to coming to the United States because she could get into Peru easier. And so she tells us, it's in the book, this whole story about, you know, hitchhiking on the back of dump trucks and everything at night and getting across the Peru. And they hadn't really had a change of clothes in a while. So I took them to a clothing store. We got new clothes for everybody. And I said, well, what else do you need? And they said, well, they hadn't had a bath or a shower in a month. So I took them to a hotel and got them cleaned up. But there again, that's just one of those stories that came about by just meeting people. And now when I travel, I actually have a goal. I try to meet 5 new people every trip, and somebody that I'll keep in touch with. Now, her situation, we actually tried to go back and find her because I knew cyclists that live in that town, but they can't find her because all the Venezuelans are on the run. They don't want to be found. So I don't know what happened to her. But I always kind of was hoping she'd write me an email or something. But all these things that have just happened kind of by chance over the last 50 years from when I was a little kid, and just one thing led to another, and I had no big grand scheme of ever being a cross-country cyclist, but it's turned out it's been 50 years of riding, and it's just one thing led to another, and so that's why I ended up writing the book. A lot of things happened that probably shouldn't have happened, you know, just by being in the right place at the right time, plus getting the support of a lot of people along the way that contributed to making everything possible. So that's why we ended up writing the book, and you know, if anybody's interested in learning more about it, I'll be here for a while talking about it. But also, if you want a copy of it, they're for sale for $20 cash. There's a lot of stories, a lot of pictures, a lot of newspaper articles in there, kind of tell the whole history of a lot of things that went on too, especially during the double transcontinental. So, anyway, well, thank you very much for having me.